Hi, guys. Wow. You all look very awake and sneezy this morning. So you might have noticed that I brought my magic wand. Pretty cool. This is actually the Harry Potter magic wand from England. So this is a story about the magic words. So at some point, we're all going to learn some magic words. Yeah? You ready? Zuckerville was a small town with big civic pride, particularly in their ability to respectfully debate every issue that came before the city council. Arguing was considered to be like fencing, a sport played with rules, respect, and grace. From the cradle to the grave, the townsfolk were taught the value and importance of knowing how to respectfully disagree with each other. It was generally agreed that the town's health depended upon it. Now, things had been this way for generations, ages and ages, until suddenly it changed. Mr. Donaldson, who had calmly begged to differ about wearing ties to ribbon-cutting ceremonies, suddenly snapped and insulted the hat that Mrs. Hill was wearing at the city council meeting. Mrs. Hill loved that hat and took great offense to Mr. Donaldson's characterization of it as, quote, something a pterodactyl must have dropped on her head. Without thinking, she snapped back at Mr. Donaldson and said, well, your nose hairs stick out like weeds and make you look like a wild boar. Oh my. The whole city council became one big kerfuffle. It dissolved into a giant uproar with loud talking, phones ringing, name calling, and no one listening. The mayor had to bang the gavel many times to bring me order to the meeting. It ended early and people left feeling frustrated, annoyed, and a little sad. The next day it was all anyone could talk about. Like everyone wanted to know why the friendly townspeople now turned to insults to make their points. Even Mr. Donaldson and Mrs. Hill were shocked by their own behavior. The rumor was that the internet had caused it, but no one was quite sure. It might have all been forgotten if it hadn't gotten worse. It got worse. As the days and weeks passed, people began to insult each other more and more with little cause. Folks stopped listening to one another, and no one seemed to care about anything other than being right. Adults and kids were fighting online and off, and everyone began to speak ill of each other. And speak ill was the perfect phrase for what was happening in Zuckerville. It seemed like there was a contagious insult illness that had infected their town, and it was spreading fast. No one knew what to do, least of all Barry. Now, Barry was a fourth grader and was being raised a Unitarian Universalist, just like you guys. His mom was a pastor at the local UU church and was booked solid with arguing parishioners. On this particular day, she picked up Barry from school and brought him to her church. In fact, she put him to work dusting the sanctuary while she attended back-to-back meetings with quarreling congregants. Barry loved the sanctuary chalice. He always pleaded with his mom to let him light it during services. So he knew where the matches were and decided to carefully light it while he dusted. He was very safe lighting the chalice. But it startled him when it flared up a tad later, and as he was carefully rubbing fingerprints off the outside of the bowl. As he stepped back, a funny old-timey face with long sideburns appeared in the flames and spoke. "Hi, thanks for releasing me." "Were you trapped?" asked Barry. "No, just kidding. I love to say that stuff. No, I'm here all the time. Usually only the kids can see me. I'm Barry. I'm Waldo." "Oh, like Where's Waldo? Is that you?" "Yeah, something like that." "Nice to meet you, Barry." "Nice to meet you too, Waldo. I've never seen a face in our chalice before. But then again, Waldo isn't always easy to find, right? Barry giggled. Once you've seen me, you can't unsee me. You'll see. In the meantime, I'm here to grant you one wish. Wow, just like in the storybooks? Only one? Aren't you supposed to grant 3? Budget cuts, son. Oh, well, that's still pretty cool. So what's your wish, Barry? Frozen yogurt for life? That's the wish you want me to grant? Yeah, but I think my mom might be a little upset about that one. Does she get a wish too? Nope, just you, lad. Well, do you know what's going on in our town? All of the insult arguing? Yeah, it's gotten really bad. Everyone's become kind of mean. Can a wish fix that? Barry, I tell you what, we're going to fix this with 3 magic spells, and you'll laugh when I tell you what they are. They're funny? Only because they're familiar. See if you recognize them and repeat after me. And kids and adults, if you would repeat the magic words after Waldo too. Number 1, we believe that each and every person is important.
We believe that each and every person is important.
Number 2, we believe that all people should be treated fairly and kindly. And number 3, we believe that we should accept one another and keep on learning together.
We believe that we should accept one another and keep on learning together.
Ha! I get it. It's our first 3 UU principles. They're magic? They are. Gather all the kids tomorrow and you can speak the words at the city council meeting. They should heal what ails this town. Okay, I will. Hey, Waldo, thanks. You're welcome, kid. Now extinguish this chalice and finish dusting before your mom catches you. Good luck tomorrow, okay? Thanks, Waldo. Barry extinguished the chalice and finished dusting just in time to see his mom poke her head in. On the drive home, Barry smiled as his mom told him she'd been asked to speak at the city council meeting, and would it be okay if he came with her? Absolutely, Barry said. As soon as he got home, he Instagrammed and Snapchatted all the kids he knew, so he could see who could join him at the meeting for a magical spell. And he typed out the words. This was going to be fun. The next day, the school bell rang, and Barry's mom picked him up and headed directly to the city council meeting. Once there, she made her way to the front while Barry hung out at the back with 6 friends. He handed out the printed magic words just as his mom got up to the podium and tried to quiet the crowd. Okay, guys, Barry said, now or never, chant together with me. We believe that each and every person is important. We believe that all people should be treated fairly and kindly. And we believe that we should accept one another and keep on learning together. Well, you could have heard a pin drop. By the time the kids had stopped saying the magic word, there was silence. Barry could see his mom looked happily surprised at the podium as she thanked everyone for their polite silence. Then she spoke uninterrupted for 5 whole minutes regarding the need to value each other, to listen with a kind, open heart, and accept the natural diversity of opinions. When she finished, there was thunderous applause and happy tears on many faces. Barry and his friends were beaming with pride. The magic words had worked. They made a pact to never forget them and to speak the magic words at home, at school, and whenever necessary. Dear children, I hope you'll never forget them either. And if you squint just right, when you look at the chalice, you might see Uncle Waldo winking in the flames. The end. And now we'd like to sing our children out. I was dreading opening Facebook that morning. I'd gotten into this dialogue with a supposed independent, and it was getting pretty heated. They didn't come off as very independent and kept essentially taking a very conservative line and attacking the previous administration and even Hillary Clinton, what she had done or not done. I had strained to keep the dialogue civil, but he was starting to attack my intelligence and character, and I was feeling triggered. So far, I'd managed to hang on to the credo that Michelle Obama and I both love: when they go low, we go high. But my sarcasm was starting to leak out. It's a sneaky thing, sarcasm. All of a sudden, thank you very much doesn't mean thank you very much at all. So I needed to tread cautiously. As my French roasted and pressed coffee did its job, I took a deep breath and clicked. I was caught off guard. He started by saying, quote, "This has been by far the most enjoyable and pleasant argument I've ever had with a stranger on Facebook. While I don't agree with all of your opinions, you've stated them in such a way that I will continue to ponder them long after this thread has died. I wish more Americans could argue this way. I think we'd be a better country if we could. Thank you." Well, I was stunned. I mean, as I'd alluded, he'd started suggesting I was stupid for believing what I had written. And stupid is such a heart-opening word, right? There goes my sarcasm again. So I really had to strain to stay focused on his argument, his fears, his concerns, and his passions. Now, maybe I should just back up a little bit and state a few things. I have this very old school idea about why we should argue and what an argument should look like. Let me put this out there and you guys can tell me later what you think. I believe that the primary purpose of argument or debate is to persuade. And ultimately, through some mutual persuasion process, create a respectful connection felt by both parties. Now, for some, that may seem obvious. But I would argue we don't act this way when we argue in public spaces. Current culture has us arguing to destroy, to annihilate, to ruin, to shame, to completely defeat our opponents. That's what talking heads do on TV news programs or now even during presidential debates. The problem is that winning ends up being a short-term victory at best. In much the same way that negative campaign ads can be effective, they also create greater voter apathy and a desire to withdraw from the system. They rarely leave us feeling good about the political waters in which we all swim. Arguing to destroy the other is like the battle to the death, winner take all. Arguing to persuade is like a tennis match or fencing. There is honor and respect for one's opponents, and there are very specific and mutually agreed upon rules of order for the engagement process. Now, I'm just going to take a wild guess and say that many of you might be starting to reflect upon exchanges you've had with rogue family members around the holidays where it seemed like there was just no point in even attempting to engage, much less persuade. Now, there may be some truth there, of course, but how should we navigate through discussions that may arise over cranberries and stuffing so that they don't, A, turn into a food fight, or B, turn into an awkward moment where no one but the pontificator states their controversial views and everyone wants to leave the discussion, if not the room? Time and place. Choose your battles, of course. But if we can't or don't want to avoid the conversation, what should we do? Well, that's what I'd like to talk about today. Now, if you'll accept on a provisionary basis that my supposition that we should be arguing to persuade, then the very first thing we have to talk about are ad hominem attacks, otherwise known as insults. Now, contrary to our president's propensity to insult any and all, if we want anyone to marginally consider what we're saying, we cannot insult them. We might be able to bully or to shame them into submission, but that's not persuasion. Just the opposite. No, if we believe there's even a glimmer of hope to persuade someone, we immediately have to remove character attacks off the table. And that's hard, I know. I mean, how many of us have been disagreeing with someone and just thought to ourselves, well, they're just not very smart or educated? Be honest. I know you're looking for those misspelled its and its in their Facebook posts, or maybe you're just one lose or loose away from losing it. Right, Pamela? Oh, and they probably have bad teeth and a still in their backyard. It would be so easy to make a joke at their expense, and I'm definitely clever enough that they wouldn't even see it coming. Very tempting indeed. Or maybe they seem like privileged, conservative, heartless elites who don't feel like they should pay a progressive income tax. They're so cut off from those who suffer, so selfishly wrapped up in their own world of comfort that they look down their noses on those who need a leg or a hand up. The point is that there are many triggers out there for everyone, but we will not get what we want from an argument if we go for the cheap shot. We will not achieve any opening, any transformation in our opponent. Insults basically tell your opponents to plug their ears, wait until your mouth stops moving, and then continue with their equal and opposite character assassination of you. Now, as the children's story notes, this approach, just to remind us all, is in direct opposition to our first three sacred UU principles. So, instead, what if we were to just listen? Listen to their energy, their passion. Listen to understand, not judge their point of view. When does their voice rise, or when do you see all caps or lots of exclamation points on Facebook? To truly listen, we have to ignore any suggestions on their part that we're dumb, isolated, stupid, a snowflake, or whatever. What if we could disregard those and listen to where their fire is, their passion? The next step for me in this process is ask questions, but ask questions to understand, not to judge. Now, and then listen to their answers, of course. Now, I know that sounds hard. It's hard to listen to questions without judgment and remove judgment completely from the process. But don't worry, there's plenty of time for that later. We'll never lose our judgment muscles. Unlike my abs, they've got plenty of crunches. So when we ask non-rhetorical questions about their argument, four interesting things begin to happen. One, it's disarming. If the questions are genuine, there's little for them to actually argue with. Two, it's constructively disruptive. It calls a timeout of sorts. Momentum ceases. It buys us a little time to think and strategize. Three, we're actually showing interest in their thought process, their side of the aisle. We all have egos, right? So showing genuine interest in someone else's mind will invariably relax, if not charm, the other person to some degree. The fourth thing that happens is that we actually require them to work through and support their own argument. How successful they are with that process in their own mind can create doubt, while also opening up possibilities by how we might respond with our counter-arguments, all by simply asking honest questions. Okay, so if we do all that work, now it's time to respond. Usually the very first thing I do is to honor their view, or part of their view. Sometimes all that means is restating it objectively or fairly as I can. And I know that I've succeeded when they say, yes, that's exactly what I was saying. Then we can respond to exactly what they were saying. With this groundwork laid, the next thing I like to do is note agreement. Our opponent will be more open and better behaved if we can find some part of their argument or statement to agree with. They'll trust us more. In a similar vein, somewhere in our response, it can help to at least acknowledge one decent point of view of theirs. Give them a bone, or maybe own something, concede a point, and see where it leads. For example, for all the good it's done, I believe that Democrats need to acknowledge that Obamacare is not perfect. It has problems and needs lots of improvement. Even President Obama acknowledges that. If we're defending it, that could be a concession. Another approach is to poke a little fun at yourself, your opinion, or the group that supports it. Let them know you're not an absolutist and you're okay with being wrong here or there. Everything our team does is not perfect and right, because only people really secure in their beliefs can do this. It can actually strengthen our arguments and again creates more trust. Binary thinking leads to one or two things. I'm so glad you guys got that joke. That's why it's called binary. Avoid the binary stand of yes or no, red state or blue state, on or off. Life is not a light switch. If we must use that metaphor, think of it as a dimmer switch. And you can imagine intelligence similarly when you're alone and no one is watching. Now, I also know that many of you are familiar with Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication, so you'll know that empathy, even contrived, formulaic empathy, because he gives you the actual sentences to speak, can lead to connection. Rosenberg's research points towards literally wearing down your opponent with long stretches of verbalized empathy. And it might help us to remember that our goals, our ends are not that dissimilar. I mean, we can't really say with absolute certainty whose means will actually achieve those ends. Reagan probably frightened the Soviet Union and Gorbachev into the best relationship we've ever had with them. But his means, like joking about a nuclear attack on Moscow, were awful. Oh, and I promise that this phrase will not bring you closer to anyone, even the person who loves you most in the world, if you use it to express something you disagree about. You always, just trust me on this one, absolutes should be avoided because they're impossible to defend. You can always find an exception to an absolute, and that takes you down a path of just silly argumentation. Generally speaking, it's good to avoid generalizations. Always avoid generalizations. We should be backing up our data with short, simple data. If we over-document and expect our opponent to go read the 24 links we posted on Facebook, we'll lose them. We should do our own research and then summarize. If they want more, they'll ask. And I believe we should always debate as if there are rules in play and we're all in community. We can bring these up from time to time if we need to, but I like to act as if they're already there. I think we argue better. By the same token, it's totally fair to call out an opponent for character attacks, especially if they're unable to argue without them. It's not to sound condescending, but it's a teachable moment. You're teaching them a better way to argue, a better way to be. Now, all of these techniques won't work all of the time. Sometimes we stumble across someone who's just too triggered in their anger and fear to really hear us. And it's okay to respectfully excuse ourselves from the table if everything we've tried has failed. I think my hope is that we do this as a last resort after exhausting the power of civil discourse to transform. Now, I want to leave you with a story today. I was living and working in D.C. as an intern for an anti-nuclear group in the fall of 1984 when Walter Mondale was effectively trounced by President Reagan. I was living with one of my best friends, Tom. At that time, I always felt Tom was like a little too good for me. He was more politically correct, a term that actually had just been coined in student government at that time. Tom seemed more evolved, always fighting the good fight, while also being a very warm, humble, and compassionate person. I later learned he was raised UU. Foreshadowing. Halloween night, we ended up at a friend's loft in Georgetown with some makeshift costumes and some makeup to look ghoulish. Tom was ready before me, and I was in the bathroom mirror trying to draw something on my face that looked cool or scary. DC was hopping that night. He wandered outside and met a tipsy woman our age who invited herself in. I came out, met her briefly, and then returned to the bathroom mirror to work on my face. I could hear their conversation clearly in the other room. I laughed now and then as she was entertainingly buzzed and talked loudly about anything and everything. Then all of a sudden she used the N-word, and not just once. She started talking about how much she didn't like boop, and I heard Tom interrupt her and simply say, "Please don't use that word. I don't like it." She laughed and thought he was kidding and used it again, and Tom interrupted immediately and said, "Please stop. That word hurts me. Please do not use it in my presence." Now, I grew up in Texas in the 1960s, and I heard that word far too many times. It always felt like a gunshot going off, and it made me flinch. It was harsh and hateful, but I never knew as a kid how to tell people to stop using it. Tom was leading a clinic on how to do just that. The girl was a little flustered and possibly too intoxicated to get that Tom had been deeply offended. She was in our space using this hateful language, but she still thought it was some kind of a joke. She used the word again, and this time Tom interrupted her and said, and I'll never forget this, he said, "Please stop. Stop using that word. It hurts me. It upsets me. If you continue using it, I will have to leave this room." Wow. I had just never heard anyone talk like that before. I'd completely stopped trying to do my makeup, and I was standing in the door with my jaw on the floor. There was a long 3-second pause, and then she began apologizing profusely. She said again and again and again that she was sorry and she'd been totally rude and this was our house, and she deeply regretted offending him. It was like a scripted transformational scene from a film. I was beaming and so proud of Tom. He didn't even insist that she leave, but he said that he would leave. He would have to leave to protect his heart. I'd never seen anything like it. She very contritely asked at that point if she could still come with us on our pub crawl, and we both said it was okay as long as she watched her language. And at some point we lost her to the night, but that was okay. Tom never insulted her. He never told her she was wrong. He never even demanded that she get out of our house. As such, I believe he persuaded her. I have no idea how much she remembered the next day, but I have never forgotten. My friends, don't give up. Words matter. Please don't give up and stop taking the high road. Remember that most great lessons in life are modeled, not taught. If we can be the embodiment of civil discourse, our message will be clearer than even the most passionate speech from the greatest of orators. And while we clearly remember the words of Dr. Martin Luther King and Gandhi, it was their embodiment of their philosophy that communicated across this divide. Psychologist Jan Iverson says, integrity is the distance between who we want to be and who we are. So who do we want to be? Do we want to aspire to the beautiful ethical ideas in our 7 principles? If so, we probably have to step out of our echo chambers, not to judge, but to listen and learn. As civil rights lawyer Brian Stevenson said at GA, we also need to get proximate. It may be one of the only solutions available to us. Now, Brian was speaking about proximity to incarcerated people or people who struggle on the fringes of society, but the same applies to people with points of view that we're far, far away from. It can really help to seek out and build relationships with an independent who seems to lean strongly conservative if you're a liberal, or vice versa. Our UU churches are blessed sanctuaries where I rarely feel a need to defend my political and social views. But that can work against us understanding a more nuanced and broader political spectrum like the one in which we live. Also, the anonymity of the internet has not been our friend. While it does allow us to instantly communicate with people all over the world, it's not true proximity. There is no eye contact. There is a very weak social construct in place compared to how we might act running into a total stranger at Trader Joe's. These techniques can and should be used online too, but to get proximate, we need real FaceTime in the real world. Find people who hold opinions that are dissimilar from yours and practice some of these techniques. It's easy to avoid insulting someone you're standing in front of, but is it just as easy to listen openly, ask questions for understanding, and not judgment? To find agreement with what may seem like two very disparate points of view? No, it's not. And that's probably a good idea why it's good to practice this once in a while. I invite us to turn our binary light switches into dimmer switches. Truth is never absolute. Relative truth sits in relationship to specific people, institutions, and events. You can have a much more interesting conversation with anyone if you can take absolute truth off the table. And as you use, we believe that each and every person is important. All people should be treated fairly and kindly, and that we should accept one another and keep on learning together. Piece of cake, right? So let's get cracking. I hope some of these techniques can help us continue to go high, regardless of how low the others go, and I think we'll be better people if we can. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.